to Art 305, Art and Mass Culture. This lecture will be on Chapter 1, Why Visual Literacy? Learning to read visual images. In a media-dominated society, each person must develop the ability to create his or her own context for the unavoidable flow of images. As consumers of the media, we must learn to read the language of visual images. Much like the words in a spoken language, images never have a singular, fixed, or transparent meaning. They change over time and according to context. When and where you see an image can very much change the meaning of the image. Chapter 1, Why Visual Literacy? In Chapter 1, Dr. Brown, the author, makes the case that visual literacy, or the ability to read visual images, in the same way we read text documents, such as a book or an internet article, is a crucial skill for anyone living in a media environment that is saturated with visual images. In other words, us. In the same way that we learn the alphabet to the language we speak, we learn to read the formal or visual elements of the images we see. We also take into consideration when and where the images were made and the cultural language of icons and myths that influence the maker of the image and the readers of the images, the viewers, us. If we understand the icons and myths or the cultural language at the time the image was made, in other words, the cultural context, we can read the image much more accurately. Why visual literacy? Why should we care? We can approach understanding images in all their complexity by examining some of their intended, evolving, and received meanings. What did the maker of the image intend? An advertisement for a product is intended to compel you to purchase it, but an artist may have a very different point of view for their image. How does the message change over time? Images take on different meanings that may be very different than what the maker or artist originally intended. Why should we care? We must develop critical awareness of mass media images in order to be able to understand, interpret, and evaluate their significance for our lives. When we do so, we become what cultural critic Bell Hooks calls enlightened witnesses. If we do not develop such awareness, we may be hypnotized by the constant, often numbing repetition of mass media images. Oftentimes, the function of binary opposition pairs is to reinforce the inequities of the pairing. In other words, in the binary opposition pair male-female, the function of images using this type of iconography is to reinforce the superiority of men in society and to stabilize the lower class stature of women in society. As a woman, I'm very interested in understanding and refuting this type of imagery. So for me, as an artist and as a member of this media society, I feel a particular sense of urgency to be visually literate. If we take a minute, can you think of a binary opposition pair in society that has affected you personally? Do you feel that it would benefit you if you were able to deconstruct the embedded destructive messages in visual images in the arts, advertising, and media today? Deconstructing meaning. Why do we look at the work of philosophers like Bell Hooks, Jacques Derrida, Hélène Cixous, and Craig Owens? These philosophers or theoreticians are very interested in examining the meanings embedded or hidden in art, advertising, and media images. Often these meanings are based on society's binary opposition pair messages, and so are destructive to those on the lower end of the opposition pair. Hooks, Derrida, Cixous, Craig Owens, and many others have dedicated their lives' work to uncovering and exposing these hidden negative messages to help viewers find freedom from the destructive messages hidden in so many of the mediated messages we view. The messages embedded in the images you see aren't necessarily destructive, of course. However, you are a much savvier and smarter viewer if you can discern or understand these messages instead of just being manipulated by them. Learning a new language. Learning to read a new language is very complex. Imagine you don't know Hebrew, but want to learn to read Hebrew texts. First, you would have to learn the basic signifying units, the Hebrew alphabet. You would have to learn the words, vocabulary, and the grammar, the way sentences are put together. Finally, you could begin to read in Hebrew. Learning to read visual images. To learn the language of visual images, we need to understand the basics of visual form, color, line, shape, and composition, how forms are arranged in relation to each other. We also need to study the modes of delivery, that is, the media with which these visual messages are presented to the viewer, whether via paintings, photographs, or computer screens. As we do so, we can begin to learn the vocabulary or styles of various locations and historic periods. We learn why it was important to make images about one part of human experience at a certain time in history and about another aspect of human life in a different time. The ongoing relationship between art and technology. The art and mass media produced by Western culture is continually influenced by the incorporation of material from other cultures. In addition to their influences from other cultures, Western art and mass media have always been dependent on advances in technology. As tools for transformation and revelation, visual technologies expand human consciousness, allowing people to see their material connection to larger ideas, forces, and movements. The images themselves and the instruments that deliver them, from paintings to computer screens, determine what we see and how we see it in both the world of representations and the world of nature. Looking is learned. How we learn to see, P-I-G. Human vision is intelligent. We think about what we see. The visible world only becomes the real world by the operation of thought. Most of us consider seeing an essentially biological and natural process. We assume that we open our eyes and automatically see whatever is in front of them. In fact, looking is learned. We see as our culture teaches us to see. Let's take, for example, how we learn to see a pig. Television introduces pigs to most urban children. Before they ever see a live pig, children know Porky Pig or Miss Piggy. Whether from children's book illustrations or mass media icons, the mental concept of P-I-G that these young people developed was based on word and image, not on direct experience, unless you grew up on a farm. Indeed, there is very little visual or behavioral correlation between Porky or Miss Piggy and a live pig on a farm. The word and image point to a mental image developed in a culturally determined process, a mental image that has been learned, not to an actual pig. There is no natural relationship between the word pig, the drawing of the cute, well-dressed pink creature who stands on 2 feet, and an actual pig. The relationship between words, which may be called signifiers, and the ideas or objects they refer to, which may be called the signified, is never natural. It is always arbitrary and always culturally determined. Images also function as signifiers. Images frequently have culturally determined, but not universal or natural relationships to what they ostensibly portray. People who have never seen Sesame Street programs may very well not recognize that the cute, well-dressed figure we can all identify as Miss Piggy is supposed to represent the dirty, four-legged creature that ruts in farmyard refuse and ends up in a sandwich. And the word pig can also stand for many other concepts, including calling a football a pigskin, calling police officers pigs, and particularly chauvinistic men referred to as pigs. Children learn to see that chubby pink creature as pig however much or little it resembled an actual pig. Their parents, their televisions, their culture taught them how to see and understand pigness. Indeed, looking is learned. We learn how to see the three letters P, I, G as pointing to a mental concept, and the drawing as pointing to some aspect of the same mental concept through complex social processes. In the same way, we learn to see cat, dog, mother, father, self, and other. Advertising images, what we desire to see, how we desire to be. Advertising images often tell us how things ought to look. When the first cameras became available for regular customers to purchase, the Kodak company began to use pictures of families as advertisements. The early Kodak images not only instructed viewers what snapshots ought to look like, they also informed viewers about how families and family events ought to look. They presented the ideal world to which Americans were supposed to aspire. The perfect family in the perfect family snapshots. Reading images. We can analyze art images from our contemporary culture as well as from other cultures and other times in order to explore how the process of depicting values in images works. In this book, we study art to examine the process of looking, to examine the visual components of learning to be ourselves, to think about ourselves and others. Our goal here might be called visual literacy. Reading images. Most students learn to read written text in early childhood. By their teen years, they can read, analyze, and respond critically to written texts like articles in newspapers or magazines. But very few can read and think critically about the photographic images that accompany them. Most of the information we receive today, from printed media to television to the internet, is at least partially visual. Such visuals, such pictorial texts, are powerful communicators. We need to learn to read and think critically about what they are saying. The tools of art history can teach us to read the images that surround us in our mass media society. Images, representation, and content. Images are never merely natural or neutral. They are always constructed representations, and they always convey the values and beliefs of the people who constructed them. The Kodak ads discussed before presented American families in a singular way, as white, middle-class groups, including mother, father, and a few children. They did not represent racial diversity. They did not represent any alternative family structures. Repeated again and again, such images told viewers what a normal family was supposed to be. Whether conscious or not, viewers who lived in different family groups were alienated and discomforted by such images. Images, representation, and content. In a similar way, women are almost always portrayed in today's advertisements as young, slender, and able-bodied. Many studies have confirmed that such images make older women, women with disabilities, and overweight women feel inadequate, unattractive, and unfeminine. Like the historic Kodak images of families, many of today's fashion and cosmetic ads tell women what they should look like. They tell women what kinds of females are valued in our culture. What is an icon? This definition is taken from dictionary.com. Here are several definitions of the word icon, including one that we may be most familiar with today as a picture or symbol on a computer screen. But in this class, we are going to think of an icon a little bit differently. An icon is a noun. One definition of an icon is a picture, image, or other representation. For the Eastern Church, a representation of some sacred personage as Christ or a saint or angel, painted usually on a wood surface and venerated itself as sacred. It could be a sign or representation that stands for its object by virtue of a resemblance or an analogy to it, as in an icon of womanhood. A person or thing that is revered or idolized. Elvis Presley is a cultural icon of the 20th century. Digital technology, this may be the one we are most familiar with. A picture or symbol that appears on a screen and is used to represent a file, account, application, as in tap the icon to download the app. Click the flag icon at the top of the web page to toggle the language to English. And in semiotics, a sign or representation that stands for its object by virtue of a resemblance or analogy to it. Art as icon, images that reflect basic cultural values. The term icon traditionally has referred specifically to a culture's religious images, as we just read. But since our culture today is not primarily represented by such religious images, popular art and fine art images can be considered as icons insofar as their appearance in the mass media shapes and reflects our culture's basic values. An iconic gesture like praying is found in historical paintings, as in the Hans Memling portrait from 1487, as well as contemporary presidential portraits. So here's the Hans Memling portrait from 1487, and here are some presidential portraits using the same, or very recognizably the same, similar gesture of the hands folded in prayer. Just to run through those again, you can see that whether it's a painting or a photograph, that gesture is very recognizable. Art as icon, creating, affirming, and sustaining culture. So you can see from the previous images that certain culturally important gestures, like hands folded in prayer, retain their significance for hundreds of years. While the medium of representing a portrait has changed from painting to photography, the gesture is still understood as culturally significant even today. Culture can be defined as the shared pattern of customs, ideas, beliefs, images, and languages that unite a group. Every culture can be seen as a kind of giant model of what it means to be a human being. Every human being within a given culture conforms in varying degrees to this model. Thus, even though culture is made by human beings, it also makes each individual, to some extent, in its own image. In our everyday usage, the word myth tends to mean a lie or a fable, something that's not true, something unscientific. In relation to culture, however, myth does not mean a lie. A culture's myths inevitably give explanations of how the cosmos, the sun, the stars, the earth was born. They also tell who men and women are in their own relationships and in their relationships with the gods, with the spirits of the ancestors, with nature, and with death. Just as every culture embodies a particular model of human nature, so every culture, including our own, has its own myths, its own stories of origin and destiny. Every person within a culture lives out a personal vision and variation of the culture's myths. Direct connection between myth and culture. The direct connection between culture and myth means that an icon is more than an image that reflects a culture's basic values. The meaning of the term icon must include the crucial role art plays in forming the culture's basic picture of what matters. More specifically, art has an icon function insofar as it helps people within a culture experience their basic myth system in a meaningful way. Without this experience of myth, a culture can literally lose its meaning. It then either dies or undergoes radical change based on some new myth, some new basic myth. If a culture's myths are destroyed, the culture can be destroyed. When Spanish conquerors effectively eradicated the Aztec religious system in the 16th century, the Aztecs were emotionally and physically disempowered. In order to compel the Aztecs to conform to European cultural conventions, the Spaniards destroyed Aztec sculptures, books, and buildings. They forbade the indigenous religious practices that gave structure and meaning to the Aztecs' lives and forcibly converted them to Christianity. Only by undermining the Aztec mythic system could the Spaniards begin to incorporate the conquered people into their colonial empire. The Spaniards' actions reflected their Eurocentric beliefs. Their culture was valued, the Aztec culture devalued. This is a clear binary opposition pair. In this model, European cultural beliefs are valued and protected, and the indigenous beliefs are debased and forcibly eliminated. Deconstructing binary oppositions. Let's look at the way the male-female binary opposition pair has functioned historically. In general, men have been characterized as big, strong, aggressive, virile, intelligent, brave, outspoken, and stoic. They have been raised to seek power by competing in public ventures. Women have been valued for being the opposite: smaller, less muscular, chaste, obedient, agreeable, nurturing, and intensely emotional. They have been taught to develop their relational, specifically nurturing skills, usually exercised in the domestic setting. In other words, human characteristics we all shared, have been divided in two. One half of them has historically been coded as male. The other half has been coded as female. And the male characteristics have often been valued over the female ones. How does society maintain its binary oppositions? Intent on keeping men as real men and women as real women, society uses hurtful language to penalize those who violate cultural expectations. If a woman steps outside her designated gender category by competing with men in the public sphere, and by taking on the supposedly male characteristics of aggression and strength, if she also becomes competitive and outspoken, she may be demonized as a bitch. Similarly, a man who steps outside his gender category by embracing what are considered female characteristics in activities may be called a girly man or other demeaning labels, again, in an attempt to force him to conform. Socializing binary opposition. Especially since the 1960s, during what is called the postmodern period, binary oppositions have been increasingly exposed and challenged. By now, many adults realize binary thinking is limiting and stereotyping. But children may not have such a critical perspective. They may not be able to resist the strong social programming into oppositional gender roles. Children are often taught to conform to the binary oppositions of gender. Fairy tales and nursery rhymes reinforce what little girls and little boys should be. Active, handsome princes rescue passive sleeping beauties and Snow Whites. Deconstructing binary oppositions in Western cultural icons. David's Oath of the Horatii. Binary oppositions are also evident in examples from the fine arts tradition of Western culture. French academic painter Jacques-Louis David painted his large historic canvas, The Oath of the Horatii, in 1784 in Rome. 1784 in Rome. David's canvas depicts the moment when three brothers, the male figures on the left, swear to their father, the central patriarchal figure, that they will fight to the death for their rights. On the right side of the painting are wives, sisters, and children responding tearfully to the imminent departure of their sons, brothers, and husbands. The painting, when exhibited in Paris, was embraced as a call to fight for one's liberty. It has often been interpreted as an incitement to revolution, inspiring the French people to rise up against monarchical monarchical abuse and establish a nation of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The clarion call of the French Revolution. And here is the very large-scale painting by Jacques-Louis David called The Oath of the Horatii from 1784. Reading David's painting. How do the formal visual elements of the painting lead us to a particular reading? If we are reading a text document, we read words to understand the meaning of the text. In a visual document, we read the formal elements of the artwork to understand the meaning of the artwork. The visual elements employed in the depiction of the two genders contribute to the binary messages. Today, we can read David's painting from many points of view. A feminist perspective allows us to see that the image reinforces traditional gender roles. David's monumental painting pictorializes what men should be like and what women should be like. Again, this is one interpretation from a binary opposition pair point of view. Men are active, women passive. Men are depicted as physically strong warriors. Fierce but controlled, they are going out into the world to compete and conquer. In contrast, the weak and emotional women are staying at home to care for the children. Read the visual elements of this painting. The visual elements employed in the depiction of the two genders contribute to the binary messages as well. All of the human actors appear on a shallow stage of action, which is situated parallel to the picture plane. The men are larger and positioned to be the focus of attention. Indeed, the entire composition rotates around the central patriarchal figure of the father. The women are smaller and secondary. Images carry cultural values. We learn to read flat images much as we learn to read pages of text, from left to right, top to bottom. In David's Oath of the Horatii, light enters the composition from the upper left and moves to the lower right. Our gaze is directed to the three brothers first, then to the patriarch whose central position is reinforced by the three windows in the architectural backdrop. Men are in bright colors, red and blue. Women are in pale pastels. Men are all drawn with straight lines and sharp angles. Women are depicted with soft, curving lines. Images carry cultural values. As we have said, images carry cultural values. From an image like Jacques-Louis David's Oath of the Horatii, viewers learn that what matters are the heroic actions of men, and that women are to serve a secondary support function. And that is why it's so important to learn to read images so we can subvert these destructive messages embedded in the images we see. Media images carry cultural values. The visual messages in David's painting can be compared to Hollywood film images. In the 1990s, many Academy Awards for the best films went to movies that focused on the heroic actions of men, especially Dances with Wolves, Unforgiven, Braveheart, and Gladiator. There has been a long tradition of film images of powerful men and comparatively passive women. Superman always had to rescue Lois Lane, just as John Wayne protected innumerable frail women in the mythic Wild West.